Hey, Mike and Kim are here in Frederick. Welcome, Mike and Kim. Anybody else want to join in and say, hey, Kayleen's here? Welcome. It's a beautiful evening in downtown Hagerstown, folks. I got to tell you. We have a fundraiser going on at the Stonebridge Pizza Place over in Funkstown tonight, and came directly. Was there this evening over here for Servant or Sucker tonight, and then here I am. It's just a good time. John is here and Tracy is here. Welcome, everybody. So tonight, we are picking up where we left off last week. We're doing one Bible story at a time, a retelling of that Bible story. And tonight we're looking at the story of Absalom in 2 Samuel chapter 14. If you would like to get the email each week that has the retelling in prose of the story that we're reading, just shoot me an email at the email address below. I noticed last week for the first time that when I set up this new software, or this new, I shouldn't call it software, this new suite, I left a letter out of my email address. Hope nobody tried to reach me that way. So if you have any questions, you can email me. I did get one today. And if you have any questions during the course of the evening, you can always put those in the chat function in the comments. I guess, yeah, it's primarily chat or comment section, I guess. And Charles is here too. So it's a little bit different if you're on YouTube versus if you're on Facebook, but either way it works. And I will see your question or your comment come up in. All right, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Oh, we got one more. Jerry's here. Welcome, Jerry. Good to have you. So let's go. Oh, by the way, the lights on the top of my bookshelf are failing. So if I have any strobe effect going on tonight, or if it's cutting in and out and it affects your viewing at home, my apologies. I have lost all control over those lights. I haven't been able to turn them off for the last month or so. Neither the remote nor the switch on them works. And so apologies in advance for any strange lighting effects. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, shall we? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So, in answer to the one question that I got this week, when last we left off, so King David had a bunch of wives. He had children by all of his different wives. So lots of people, all of his children have half siblings. Some of them also have whole siblings. So Absalom and Tamar were full siblings. Absalom was a son and Tamar was his full sister. They had a half brother named Amnon, who was sort of David's favorite. And Amnon assaulted Tamar, and David didn't do anything about it. So after waiting for an opportunity, Absalom avenged Tamar by murdering Amnon, and then fled the country, went to a different country to avoid justice. That's where we left off last week, and that is where we pick up this week. So Joab. Now remember Joab. Okay, Joab is David's right-hand man, his top general, and his fixer. Whenever there's dirty work to be done, as Dr. Birch used to say, Joab is there ready and willing to do the dirty work. But sometimes Joab acts without David's consent. Sometimes it's for plausible deniability, I think, but sometimes it's really because he wants to do something that David would not approve of, but he thinks it needs to be done, so he just does it. So, Joab. Somebody needs to make a movie about Joab. One of, if not the most fascinating characters in the Bible. Joab knew that David's heart was deeply troubled. He missed Absalom, but he was conflicted. So Joab hatched a plot to bring Absalom out of exile. One day, he brought a wise old woman to see the king. She was wearing burlap clothing to show that she was in mourning. When she was admitted to see the king, she begged, "Please help me, my king." She answered, he asked, "What troubles you?" And she answered, "I've been a widow for a long time. I had 2 sons, but one day they got into a fight. There was no one around to intervene, and the one killed the other. Now, the rest of the family wants justice, but he's all I have left." The king said, "Don't give it another thought. I'll make a proclamation that your son is under my protection. No one will touch him. If anyone complains about it, send them to me, and I'll deal with them." Then the woman said, "May I speak freely, my lord?" The king said, "You may." She said, "Why don't you handle your own affairs this way? Your own son is banished. Life is short. God doesn't want us to live as outcasts. You know what is right. You can discern good from bad like an angel of God." And the king replied, "Tell me the truth. Did Joab put you up to this?" She said, "Nothing gets past you." "Yes, he did." The king turned to Joab and said, "I get the point. You're right. So go and get Absalom and bring him back to Jerusalem, but don't bring him to the palace. I still can't look at him. Tell him to stay at home." So Absalom returned to Jerusalem, but he didn't see the king. Everyone liked Absalom. He was the best looking man in Israel. His hair was so thick that when he cut it every year, the trimmings weighed over 4 pounds. He had 3 sons and a daughter. His daughter was beautiful, and he named her Tamar after his sister. 2 years went by, and Absalom still hadn't seen his father. He wanted Joab to intervene on his behalf, but Joab ignored him. After Joab failed to respond to 2 messages, Absalom sent servants to burn Joab's field. Joab showed up at Absalom's house and demanded to know why he burned his field. Absalom answered, "Because that was the only way to get your attention. Go talk to the king on my behalf. Bringing me to Jerusalem was pointless if he's never going to see me. I want to see him. If he still thinks I'm in the wrong and he kills me, so be it." So Joab talked to the king, and the king sent for Absalom. When he arrived, he bowed down to his father, and then David embraced him and kissed him. This is the word of the Lord. Good evening, Barbara. It is great to have you here tonight. Thank you for joining us. So, what a story. This is sort of I'll call this a nice story compared to last week's. It's also a nice story compared to next week's. It's a nice little respite in the relationship between David and Absalom. Oh, the relationships between kings and their adult sons. It's just always complicated, isn't it? Not that part hasn't changed. Thankfully, the royal families of today, as far as I know, and of course there aren't that many left. They don't have to deal with quite this bad. Once again, this is interesting to me. Once again, David's advisors feel the need to deliver truth via somewhat deceptive means. So when Nathan needed to confront David about his sin with Bathsheba, he didn't just come out and tell him, you did this and you shouldn't have done it. He told him a story so that if David judged the story rightly, he would then have to judge himself rightly. And now Joab has done the same thing. Why do they feel the need to do that? Why don't they go at him straight and say, "David, you did this and you shouldn't have done that. You should have done this"? Now, there will be times when Joab, later in the story, there are times when Joab gets much more confrontational with David. Maybe at that point he feels like he's got the credibility or the tenure that he can do that. But at this point in the story, he's doing the same thing that Nathan did. Do they have reason to be afraid to come at him directly like that? David more of a hothead than we realize? So, what does this story tell us about God? Well, once again, God is not directly involved in the story. It's interesting, though, that the wise old woman in this story plays a function very similar to the one that Nathan played in David's life earlier with Bathsheba. So David came to him and told him a story. So, what do you think? The wise old woman comes and does the exact same thing. Both of them present their stories as if they're factual stories, when they're actually metaphors for what David has done. The difference, of course, is that when Nathan went to David, he was acting at God's behest. God told Nathan, this is what happened and it shouldn't have happened. The wise old woman is not acting on behalf of God. She's acting on behalf of Joab. Now, so then the question is, was Joab acting on behalf of God? I kind of doubt it. Now, granted, I never want to give Joab the benefit of the doubt, okay? Joab is a dark guy. I do believe that Joab is always doing what he thinks is best for the nation, maybe even what he thinks is best for David, but that doesn't seem to have any connection with God as far as I can tell. Joab relies exclusively on his own intuition. And I guess Joab understands people pretty well. I'm not at all sure that Joab understands God, though. So in my reading, Joab is doing what is right in his own eyes, and in the end, it's going to backfire. Bringing Absalom back was a bad idea. Why was it a bad idea? Well, what does this story tell us about ourselves? When there's a conflict, it's natural for us to try to smooth things over. And much of what passes for peace in the world today is not true peace. True peace is a just peace. And when there is a just peace, there's no conflict waiting under the surface. That's not, most of the peace in the world isn't like that. Most peace is just sort of smoothed over on the top of the waters, and there's very turbulent waters deep down waiting to sort of erupt. It's very natural when there's a conflict to want to take a shortcut to try to find an easy way to smooth things over, take the path of least resistance. And that's what Joab is doing here. There's this tension in the air because Absalom is banished, and David, on the one hand, David probably wants justice for Amnon. Some of us might feel that Amnon already got his justice. On the other hand, he misses his son and he wants his son back. So Joab wants to break this tension, because one thing you'll learn about David is David does not rule effectively when he's preoccupied. And, maybe that feature comes standard on every model of leader. I think probably none of us lead well when we are preoccupied, particularly when we're preoccupied with family stuff, right? So he wants to break this tension between David and Absalom. Does he feel is he doing this because he thinks it's in the best interest of the country? Maybe. Is he doing it because he feels sorry for David? Maybe. I don't know. I'm going to assume that he's doing what he thinks is right. He just doesn't always know what's right because he doesn't talk to God. What does this story tell us about our relationship with God and each other? Well, shortcuts don't work. So Joab brings Absalom home, but what needed to happen next was a conversation between David and Absalom. That conversation doesn't happen. It never happens. He doesn't see him for 2 years, but when they finally get together, they don't talk about what happened. So David agrees to bring Absalom home, but David is not willing to do the reconciliation work he needs to do with his son. Joab should have forced the issue, but he did not until it was too late, and even then only under duress, because Absalom burned his field. You're probably figuring out at this point that Absalom is not somebody you want to mess around with, okay? Do not wrong Absalom, or you will be sorry that you wronged Absalom. And once again, Absalom has strong ideas about right and wrong, but doesn't seem to talk to God. David, on the other hand, yeah, it's like David is a good leader and good at diplomacy, except in his own house. Are we all that way? I don't know. Maybe everybody's more effective at the office than they are at home. I don't know, but David would never advise somebody else to handle things the way he's handling them. And next week, we will begin to see what the consequences for that will be. All right, so that's it for our Bible study this week. So when last we left off in the news of the weird, you remember News of the Weird? News of the Weird was a syndicated newspaper column. The guy who ran it died a few years back. I loved it. It was a compilation of true news stories from across the country that sounded impossible, or you couldn't believe that stuff like that happened. And it's a fun article. News of the Weird. The United Methodist Church, I mean. In the United Methodist Church. Last we left off, we were slightly over halfway through General Conference. We are now completely through General Conference. Last week when we met, we were halfway through General Conference 2024. General Conference 2020, but now we have completed General Conference 2024 because in week 2 of General Conference 2020, the Judicial Council decided that it could count as both. Or I'm not clear whether it counts as both or whether we're now saying 2020 just didn't happen and we're doing 2024. At any rate, they convened General Conference 2020 and they adjourned General Conference 2024. So much happened at General Conference 2024. The regionalization plan passed, which means each region of the globe now, the United Methodist Church, will be semi-autonomous. We will all share the same constitution, but we will each be able to adapt the rest of the discipline to suit our missional needs. That is a constitutional change, so it will still need to be ratified by 2/3 of the annual conferences. We removed from the chargeable offenses anything that had to do with being a self-avowed practicing homosexual or anything that had to do with performing same-sex weddings. Chargeable offenses, for those of you who don't know. There is a list in the discipline for chargeable offenses, things that will get you kicked out of the United Methodist Church. Yes, we have excommunication in the Methodist Church. It is hardly ever applied to lay people. In fact, it's probably been over 100 years since it was used on a lay person. It does get used on clergy, though. There are chargeable offenses that can result in a pastor losing their credentials. And Methodist pastors are members of the conference, not of individual churches. So if you lose your credentials, you're no longer a United Methodist either. I suppose you could come back in as a lay person. My understanding is if you lose your credentials, you're not a Methodist at all anywhere. So there's a list of chargeable offenses and if you commit one of these chargeable offenses, you can be charged and sent before a church trial, which is, the Judicial Council is like the Supreme Court of the United Methodist Church. So in the past, and in many parts of the world, if you performed a same-sex wedding, you could be brought up on charges. If you were discovered to be a self-avowed practicing homosexual, you could be brought up on charges. Now, there are parts of the country where those laws were not enforced, this being one of them. Most of the Northeast region being one of them, and the West Coast being the other. Now, I should say, I'm saying that they weren't being enforced. That's not entirely true. It's only for the past couple of years in this conference that neither one was being enforced. For a long time, you could not become a pastor in this conference if you were openly practicing, or if you were openly gay. You had to be closeted gay. and we did have closeted gays. They were not married. They Most of them were not married. Some of them were, but they had real challenges. Anyway, all gone, all removed from the list of chargeable offenses. The ban on gay clergy was lifted not just from chargeable offenses, but from the prerequisites for being a pastor. The ban on same sex weddings was lifted not just from chargeable offenses, but from everywhere in the discipline. In fact, the discipline now says that congregations are free to follow their own consciences on this. The superintendent can neither force them to do something nor prevent them from doing something. It's entirely up to them. The social principles have been revised. Our language on sexuality has changed. In some ways, it's gotten a lot murkier, but I'm not going to go into that right now. There's reasons for the things they changed. Yeah, I'm not going to go into that right now. Of all these changes, all of them passed by a very healthy margin. Most of them passed overwhelmingly, which means we now have a strong consensus on the fact that we disagree. What I mean by that is the wording on some of this stuff makes it clear that all of these changes were made not because everybody now agrees that homosexuality is not a sin, but because we're no longer willing to fight over it, and we're willing to be in the same church with people who disagree with us and let everybody follow their own consciences. So there is a strong consensus that we can agree to disagree. So the United Methodist Church now has no doctrine relating to homosexuality, either the orientation or the practice, which is not the same as endorsing it once again. It gives individual churches the freedom to endorse it or not. That's where we stand with that. That's I can't tell you how good it feels to be on the other side of this now. And I know not everybody shares that, and honestly, I know that there are many people for whom it came too late. A lot of pastors lived their lives celibate, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. A lot of people chose not to go into ministry, even though they heard God calling them to do it, because they knew that it wouldn't work in the Methodist Church, given its laws at the time. And there were other people who entered into the church and then eventually got kicked back out of the church. And of course, there were other people who lived life in fear for years and years and years. And some of those folks are breathing a huge sigh of relief, and others are saying, well, they're kind of traumatized, and it's going to be a little while before they're ready to make nice. It's they would say they've been punched in the face every year, and now they're not getting punched in the face anymore. And are they glad they're not getting punched in the face anymore? I'm like, well, you're not exactly doing me a favor by not punching me in the face anymore. So I absolutely understand that, and I don't want to say anything that would belittle that. Yeah, a lot of strong emotions in the Methodist world. And if any of you are hearing any of this stuff being put out by the Good News Movement or the WCA, they've really just lost touch with the truth on where people stand on this. If they want to disagree, fine, disagree, but do it honestly. So that's it for Methodist news. I don't have any other. I looked to see what other religious news was going on in the world. Nothing jumped out that I wanted to talk about. Anybody got anything they want to talk about tonight? Oh, yeah, Barbara, I didn't see your entire comment. Quite a family tree. Oh my goodness. Yeah, the family tree is in the Bible. It's funny because there have always been, not always, from time to time, there have been Christian groups that have claimed that the Bible endorses polygamy. Well, if you look at the stories of men with multiple wives, I think you'd have a really hard time claiming that the Bible endorses it. Um, yeah, these family trees are an absolute mess. Now, would David's family have been more functional if he had only had one wife? Yeah, I think it would have been. I'm not going to say I don't know, or it's hard to say. No, it would have been more functional. Good grief. What a mess. Yeah, two things that you see over and over again in families is that when there's multiple wives with kids in the picture, it's a mess. The other is when parents, fathers or mothers, it's usually fathers, but sometimes mothers too, whenever they play favorites with the kids, that goes badly in the long run as well. And I haven't seen any questions pop up yet or any comments. Um, so this week is Mother's Day. Expect a Mother's Day sermon of some sort on Sunday. I don't remember how I decide. Oh, note to self: remember to return calls after second message. I don't get it. Oh yes, with Absalom. Yes, with Joab. Yes. Remember to return calls after the second message, lest somebody light something on fire. Yes, absolutely, Mike. Thank you. I don't know why I didn't get that. Um, yeah. So Mother's Day. I don't remember. Um, I've got my sermons planned out through Pentecost, but I don't remember what I planned. That's the funny thing about planning ahead. You plan ahead, then if you plan too far, you forget what you planned. We're having a tea party here for those of you who are in the Hagerstown area. So, worship at 8 and at 10 and in between, tea party with my favorite tea, constant comment, and lots of all the little goodies you get at a traditional tea party. So I hope to see everybody either there or online in the next week. Thank you for joining tonight. Let's close with a word of prayer. God, give me the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. Amen. Well, folks, thanks for joining, and I'll see y'all in church